We were hanging out. He's like, hey, do you think Phoebe would want to go home? No, I'm going to check. It's like, oh, no, of course. She's just the whole time she's talking, she's getting ready to come over here, though. Run that gas.
Somebody turn the heat up.
You're home? Oh, I'm not.
You mean down?
So,
I said it, no, I said somebody did turn it up.
started going down.
Open a
Very
window.
warm in
Yes,
here.
it
It's hot in here.
I was like,
You're not hot. Oh, I'm very.
might be stuck on. Phoebe's, dude, she got this grin on her face.
Oh, thanks.
And
It's
dude,
so old. It is so old.
but it's filmed, it's gonna come out on a created episode.
You know that it's makeup and coffee.
10 point, dude. A small 10 point.
A big one.
Yeah. No, dude, that was good. Dude, Doug, man. I looked at Doug. She said, I want that one. And I looked at him, and Doug nodded his head. And I'm like, Phoebe, there's a 4 point over there, like a unique 4 point. You lost one. You know, I'm trying to get her to shoot something else.
This and jacket. I don't like both. I don't like
I
If
turned
you
it down.
It's fine.
press and hold the power button, if it's an older one, you just hold the power button. No, the side main button. And hold it.
Okay, we're gonna get started in
The
one
new ones, you
minute.
have to hold the button.
All right, 6 o'clock. Tonight is a regular legislative meeting, but before we go into that meeting, we have 2 special committee meetings. The first one is Public Welfare and Safety with Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring to order the Public Welfare and Safety Committee meeting. It's Monday, December 20th, 2021, time 6 o'clock p.m. Place, council chambers. All committee members are present, as well as all council members and all others noted. We have a request for legislation. We did call for this ordinance in October, but we were awaiting some information from the law department and a map from planning in order to be able to move forward with this. So, given that, we have to call for this again if we would like to vote on it. So, do I have a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Rule 302, the 10-day rule?
I'll make a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor?
Aye.
And we need to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 304, not on the agenda.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin. Do I have a second?
And I'll second.
Second by Mr. Greer. All in favor?
Aye.
And a motion to invoke Rule 702 to suspend Rule 401, not called for in Committee of the Whole.
I'll make a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401.
Motion made by Mr. Greer. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I also would like to entertain a motion to amend the ordinance before voting on it to add emergency wording. It wasn't initially asked for as an emergency, but because it's the last meeting of the year, we have to have it as an emergency. So do I have a motion to amend the ordinance to include emergency wording?
I'll make a motion to amend this request, or the ordinance, to include emergency wording.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we will be voting on this piece of legislation tonight, and it has been amended to read and declaring an emergency. Oh, well, I have to call for it out of committee, sorry. Do I have a motion to call for the amended piece of legislation this evening?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin,
Thank you.
And I'll second.
seconded by Mr. Greer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mr. Greer. Do I have a second?
A second motion.
Second by Mr. Griffin. We are adjourned at
Thank you.
6:03.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one other special committee meeting, and that's Finance and Personnel with Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance and Personnel Committee is going to come to order. The date is Monday, December the 20th, 2021. This is a special meeting. The time is 6:04 p.m., and we are in council chambers. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council people and guests as noted on my agenda sheet. The requested legislation is from our safety director, Elizabeth Doherty, and we all have a copy of the letter that she sent asking for this. And the title of the ordinance is Enter into Contract Medical Mutual. And this is going to be ordinance number 148, 2021. And this is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a one-year contract with Medical Mutual of Ohio, MMO, through a partnership with Summit County Health Connection for employee benefits, which include medical, prescription, dental, and vision coverage beginning January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022, and declaring an emergency. This did not have the emergency on here originally, but all of us have received a copy with the "and declaring an emergency" phrase in there, as well as I said the letter. And in order to call for this, we have to invoke some rules, as we did for Mrs. DeBevic's piece of legislation. We have to invoke Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302, which is the 10-day rule. Do I have a motion to suspend? First made by Mrs. Angela.
I will second it.
Okay, and seconded by Mrs. DeBevick. Okay, then we also have to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 304 because it was not on the agenda. Do I have a motion to call for that suspension?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Medges and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff. Then we also have to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 401, not called for in Committee of the Whole. Do I have a motion for that? Mr. Medges,
I'll second it.
seconded by Mrs. DeBevick. Okay, thank you. Now, do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
I'll make a motion.
Motion made by Mrs. Angeloff. And do I have a second for that?
I will second it.
Seconded by Mrs. DeBevick. And all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Motion made by Mrs. DeBevick and seconded by Mrs. Angela. And we are adjourned at 6:07 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go right into our legislative meeting. Okay, this is a... What's that? Someone say something?
No, I called.
Oh, okay. This is a regular legislative meeting of the Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, December 20th, 2021. The time is 6:08 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation by yours truly. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today to ask for your blessings as we discuss the concerns of our city in these difficult times. We continue to pray for guidance through unity and the wisdom in leading our community. Please safeguard our medical community and those essential workers who are putting themselves at risk around the world. We ask that you work through us and strengthen our hearts and minds in making positive decisions as they come before us. And I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, approval of the minutes of the regular legislative...
Roll call.
Oh, excuse me. I don't have, there we go. Roll call, please.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Here.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mr. Greer.
Here.
Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn. Here. Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Now the approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 13th, 2021, as presented. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 13th, 2021, as presented.
And Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 13th, 2021.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Heidi to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 13th, 2021, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
We have none.
Matters requested.
All been dispersed.
Thank you. Citizens addressing council. All righty. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 141-2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Purchase of Property at 124 15th Street Northwest. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to execute an agreement to purchase the property at 124 15th Street Northwest under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program in the amount of $62,500 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Ordinance 141-2021.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 141, 2021.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 141, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Ordinance number 142, 2021, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Easement, Summit County Engineer. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to execute easement agreements with the Summit County Engineer to provide temporary and permanent easements on city-owned parcel number 1500572 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt ordinance number 142, 2021.
Thank you, and Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 142, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance 143-2021, presented by Mrs. DeBevick. Title, enter into contract BRYX Emergency Response Simplified. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contract with BRYX Emergency Response Simplified in the amount of $63,000 for the purchase of a pre-alert system for both fire stations and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 143, 2021.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. The motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 143, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Ordinance number 144-2021, presented by Mrs. Angela. Title, enter into contract OHM Zone Co. Consulting Services. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contract with OHM Zone Co. Consulting Services in the amount of $148,500 to provide review and analysis of the city's current zoning code, administration, code writing, and related services for an update and rewrite to the existing Barberton Development Code and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angeloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 144-2021 be adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second the motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 144, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Ordinance number 145-2021, presented by Mrs. Frye. Title, Authorized Payment, Travelers Insurance. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to pay an invoice to Travelers Insurance in the amount of $6,870.50 for payment of the deductible on various insurance claims and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 145-2021.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 145-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Ordinance 146-2021, presented by Mrs. DeBevick. Title, Disposal of Radios. An ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to dispose of and sell mobile, vehicle, and portable handheld radios on GovDeals.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 146-2021.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 146-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
yes,
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Ordinance number 147-2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Enter into Agreement, Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into an agreement with Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District, MWCD, for the acceptance and execution of the Partners in Watershed Management Grant, PWM, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes,
Mrs. Frye,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Colburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 147-2021.
Thank you, and Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 147.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Colburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 147, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Ordinance 148, 2021, presented by Mrs. Frye. Title, Enter into Contract Medical Mutual. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a one-year contract with Medical Mutual of Ohio, MMO, through a partnership with Summit County Health Connection for employee benefits, which include medical, prescription, dental, and vision coverage beginning January 1, 2022 through December 31st, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 148-2021.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 148, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ordinance 149, 2021, presented by Mrs. DeBevick. Title, Amendment to Chapter 656, Registration of Convicted Persons, and ordinance amending Chapter 656, Registration of Convicted Persons by adding Section 656.08, Prohibitions on Residency, and declaring an emergency, as amended in committee this evening.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks?
Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. President. I want to thank Mrs. Vivek, Mrs. Miller, and Mr. Hunt, who's here, or if he's listening online. This will definitely help the victims and also help future victims of sex offenders, and I just want to say thanks again for working on this. That'll be it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 149, 2021, as amended this evening in committee.
Thank you, and Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. DeBevick's motion for adoption of ordinance number 149-2021 as amended.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Greer to adopt ordinance number 149, 2021 as amended. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance 136-2021, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title, Appropriation Cox Powell Building. An ordinance appropriating $500,000 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the operation and maintenance budget of the general fund miscellaneous and declaring an emergency. Our first reading was on December 13th, 2021.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 136-2021.
Thank you, and Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, seconded by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 136-2021. Are there any remarks? Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is surprisingly the first ordinance that was split down the line between some phone calls I got. Just before council, I was talking to a gentleman that was flying a Cessna airplane. He was in the air, and he called me to say he wasn't for this. So there's some contention on this. I think it's going to be good for the city ultimately. Just know that this is, there's a lot of eyes on this project, and it's going to be an example of what we can do if this passes, if we invest in our community. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any other remarks? Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to echo Mr. Greer's words. I also received a mixed bag of opinions about how I should vote on this evening. And ultimately, I think it's a great opportunity for the city of Barberton, and so I will be voting yes.
Okay. Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. This past Friday, I was able to meet with the mayor, and we had some good discussions on not just this project, but the residuals and other issues that are going to need to be addressed, and a lot of positivity came out of that, so I am in favor here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
This ends the second readings.
Third reading of ordinances and resolution.
Ordinance number 130, 2021, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Foundation Grant Request, Skate Park. An ordinance approving the submission of a grant application to the Barberton Community Foundation in an amount up to $75,000 for the construction of a skate park. The first reading was November 22nd, 2021. The second reading of this was December 13th, 2021.
Thank you. Motion to adopt. Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion to adopt ordinance number 130, 2021.
Thank you. Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second Mr. Hyde's motion to suspend.
No,
To
it's
adopt.
To adopt, I'm sorry.
all right. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 130, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
This ends the third readings.
Okay, we'll go right into communication with the mayor. Are you ready? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank council for the passage of the grant request for the Cox Powell Herald Building, however you name it. I will provide monthly updates. There is a lot more that has to go into this, so there will be more coming in front of council. But this is kind of the first step in a series of steps. Met with some people this weekend, met with the Herald this morning on this as well, and you know, mixed messages, mixed opinions. But I threw out, let's flip the script a little bit, let's change the narrative here. I came to the public, I came to council, and I said, the city's got a building that's vacant. I've got a developer who is interested in developing it. They want a grant from the city, $500,000, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spend over $300,000 and demo it with no plan. Now what's the backlash? Now everyone's going, oh my gosh, what's going on here? You know, there's risk involved in everything. You know, we're going to stay on top of this. I think this is going to be a huge catalytic project for the downtown and for the entire community. So I will keep you updated on that. I think if you ask any mayor, they're going to tell you that the two biggest challenges they face or hurdles is going to be time and money. You know, sometimes you don't have either. Sometimes you have one, but not the other. With these two things, the city can do anything. If you look at the corporate sector, they typically don't have that problem. They want something done, they just get it done. So whether it's infrastructure, the opioid epidemic, the current pandemic, our parks, workforce development, economic development, setting up the DORA, the CIC, fleet management, water, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, property maintenance, or a number of other tasks that me and my staff do on a daily basis. I can assure you that we're all working very diligently and very hard for the best outcome. I'm excited because we stand at a very exciting and an important place in history of this city. We have the opportunity to write the history of this city with an outcome that is life-changing for its residents. With the federal funding that's coming in, that kind of takes care, in part, one of the hurdles that cities deal with, right, the money. Still haven't released how we can use the funding, but we have a general idea, and so we've been working through that. We've got all the structure and kind of set up. We stand in a good place. We're with utility funds, and you know, several years ago, the governor allowed and city council approved an increase of the permissive licensing tax. That really is helping our streets, and it's really helping move forward some of the infrastructure needs that we have. So we stand at a very important place in the history of the city to be able to write that history for generations to come. So a lot more obviously coming forward in the next few weeks and months. I was hoping to take some time off around the holidays, but I'm not going to be able to. But it's all exciting, good stuff. So I'll have more information for you here very soon. Councilperson DeBevick, I want to thank you for your years of service to this body and to the community. Councilperson Medges, I appreciate our years working together on city council and as mayor. You've done a lot to improve the city and your ward. You probably had more neighborhood meetings than any council person I've ever met. And then on an annual basis, feeding the football players, you know, we've seen these football players numerous times in here, and that's a task that and an expense that is huge. So I want to thank you for your dedication and service to this body and this community. Moving to 2022, the structure is there. The opportunities are in front of us. It's our time to make the difference and address the issues that lay before us. So I'm very excited about where we're at and where we're going. So, you know, we're making data-driven decisions. We're planning and charting out the rest of the city moving forward and addressing things in a very swift but very calculated way. So over the break, if you have any questions, please contact me. And in most cases, I'll be in the office, and then you can get a hold of me and come on in. But, very excited on where we're at, and that's all I have for right now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything from the good of the body? Mr. Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm standing to say this. Councilor DeBevick, we started working together quite some time ago at a restaurant. And you started telling me a little bit about city stuff, and at first I brushed you off because I was in the kitchen, I was probably annoyed with you because you're a servant. But then I started to listen to you, and then I started to ask questions. And then we started texting, and then we started calling. Little did I know you'd be prepping me for the seat I'm in today. So I wanted to thank you for that. And President Medges, long time ago, I don't know if you remember, but there was a game on. You and I were sitting next to each other at a place called David B's. And you said that more people need to start coming to meetings and getting involved. And I took that to heart. While she may have been prepping me, you're the reason that I'm sitting in this chair today. I want to thank you and Councilor DeBevick. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Greer.
I'm gonna stand too. I think everybody's probably gonna say their goodbyes, but Mrs. DeBevick, I didn't know that you were the one until I just heard this, so this is fresh, that you were the one that got Bebe into this. Well, Baby's the one that got me into this, so it really goes to show that how the impact of stepping up is. Community service, public service is never, very rarely are you looked at in the spotlight in the good. You're always the bad. And it's the things like this that go unsaid that really impact the city. You inspired Bebe, and Bebe inspired me to get involved. So that is a huge thing. And a lot of things that you do behind the scenes from Cub Scouts, I seen that. You know, when I was running that, you did a lot of stuff for the Cub Scouts behind the scenes. You do a lot of stuff for the festivals, and I'm sure you're not going to stop doing that. And we'll probably all see you. So I just want to thank you for your service to the community. You are the reason why I'm here in proxy. And it's been a pleasure to be here for 2 years with you. Mr. Medges, thank you for all that you do. I think that we need as council to do more of what you do with the community programs, the leaf raking, and the yard sale stuff and interacting. And you have shown me how to do that. And you're a beacon of, I think, what council people should do to interact with the community. And thank you again for your service. You guys both been here for a long time, so thank you again.
Thank you. Mrs. Bevick.
Thank you. Well, I don't really want to stand, but, and I'm mad at Bebe for making me cry, because I wasn't going to cry. I just want to take a minute to thank the residents of Barberton for allowing me to serve as council at large for a decade. I'm mad at you because I wasn't going to cry. The honor's been mine, and I hope I served everyone well. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my family. We can all attest to the fact that living a life of service isn't always easy. I want to thank them for sharing me with the citizens. Okay, I'm done crying. I just wanted to say thank you, and you're in trouble. I hope everyone has a safe, healthy, and happy holiday, and go Browns. Let's get out of here.
That's right.
You can't leave until we
Mrs. Fry.
I just wanted, I'll start with you, Craig, because I've known you for years and years and years. And when I first got on council, I really wanted to fashion my career somewhat like yours was, because you paid so much attention to your ward, to your residents. You had all these neat little programs that you would do, and I really thought that was great. And I thought, I want to be a council person like Craig. So I'm sorry that you're leaving, but, you know, at some point everybody has to leave, you know? It's not like a lifetime job. But now on to Mrs. DeBevick. Mrs. DeBevick and I have worked together for the past 10 years. We've been seat mates. And we worked on some projects together and, you know, bounced things off of one another. And at the time that she came on, she was appointed, and I was the only woman with 9 men. So it was nice to have another woman come. And then we had more and more women join forces. So I just want to tell you thank you for what you have done in council, and thanks for working with me and with everyone else towards making Barberton a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Angela.
Thank you, Prez. I always call you Prez, so I have to do that now. I want to thank you for watching my back. There was times we screamed and hollered and carried on, and you know where I come from, but you had my back. And that meant a lot to me, and I want to thank you for that, even though I don't know if I threatened you or what, but you did have my back and publicly, and I want to thank you for that. It was a rough start at the beginning. It still is a rough start, still going strong, but I want to thank you for always listening and sometimes listening to me. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm gonna say thank you for everything you've done. I still remember the first time I met you, you came to my station, you seen the big monster sign outside, you're like, why are you pushing marijuana out of the store? I'm like, it's a monster sign. So I judged you wrong right away from the beginning. After I got to know you and hear about you, I'm like, he's a good guy, he cares about the community. That big M, he thought it was something different on the window. But it was a monster sign.
It doesn't help that it's neon green.
I know. So I still remember that day. And Mr. Vivek, thank you for everything you've done. I learned a lot from you and watching you in here, and I appreciate your time. Happy holidays for everybody, and let's kick ass in 2022. I think following the mayor's decision with this and moving to the big project, I think I'm excited for it. And there's always a saying, to make 10, you have to give away 9. It's a business. I mean, you have to invest 9 into it, but you'll make that 10. So I think with this big project, we'll make something happen with other properties in downtown moving forward with us too. So in that's it. I appreciate your guys' time. Happy holidays to all you guys.
Thank you.
One last thing.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Didn't want to leave out because she's in the room here. Counselor-elect Thompson, you'll be joining us up here in a couple of weeks and joining me as the fellow at-large representative. Yourself, me, and Counselor DeBevick, we're not very big in stature, but the shoes she's leaving behind to fill are. So you and I can do that, and I hope we serve that seat proud. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a big speech here. We're not going to say that. But there was one thing that I wanted to do as a councilman. I wanted everybody in my ward to know who I was. And I wanted everybody in my ward to know what ward they were in. You know, there are people in this town that don't even know who their councilman is or don't know who even ward they're in.
Right.
And if you don't get out there and let them know, they're not going to find out. So I walked my ward. And you want to meet the people? Go out there and meet them. You got to do it. They're not going to come to you unless they have a problem. If you go out there and walk it, I walked it and people go, are you campaigning? I said, no, I'm just walking to meet people. And they're like astonished because people don't do that. All you got to, you don't have to walk the board, like I did. You just walk a neighborhood every once in a while. Just walk around. Let them see you. When they see you, they'll believe in you. They know you have a concern for them. So there's a couple other things I'm going to do. I'm still going to do the yard sale. I'm not giving that up. Next year, it's June 9, 10, 11, 12. You'll all get a notice. And people
People ask now.
start planning this thing in January. I get more calls in January than any month. And they go, well, I'm taking my vacation for this. Wow, okay, if that's what you want. And I'm also going to do the leaf removal with the football team. That is a really good thing. Everybody benefits from that. And the mayor was talking about feeding the football team. You want to see somebody eat? Feed 70 football players. The first time we did that, and I fed 70 football players, there were 120 hamburgers alone. There was 4 big trays of chicken, 15 pizzas, Green Diamond donated food, Casa de Ranchero donated food. There was so much food, it was all gone. I mean, they can eat. And it's very, you spend 2 or 3 weeks planning that, and that food's gone in 20 minutes. And it made me happy, so. And I'm going to keep doing that. I enjoy that a lot. I could tell you all kinds of things, but I'm not going to tell you because we got a game to watch. So, with nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? This is the Bevic.
Wait,
Wait.
Mrs. Miller.
Go ahead.
The draft rules were submitted. Did nobody vote on the draft rules that were asked for?
Somebody told me that we weren't voting on them tonight.
I don't know that.
That's what I was told, that they would be voted in committee. I gave everybody a copy of
We
them.
don't have to do it that way. We can vote on them right now, right?
Well, you can, but I was asked to have draft rules out by the end of the week, which I did.
And they all have copies of all the
Yeah,
changes.
and I read them all, so when you sent them. Because we don't have to do, it's not an ordinance.
Doesn't
We
have to
can
be
vote on the rules. You had
At the-
asked us to vote on them, Justin. You said you wanted us to vote on them before the end of the year. He did too.
But I was told when I came in, we're not voting on the rules, I don't know.
That's what I was told, they were to go for the next year.
Who said that?
You said you wanted to look through because you had some changes, and then Carol said she had something she questioned. So it was gonna go before the rules committee and be voted on. That's just what I was told.
This mean I can wear a hoodie next time? This is awesome. Take your time. No rush. This way I can wear my hoodie.
Well, I don't care one way or the other. Number one, I was asked to have them done before the end of the week, which I did. Number two, nobody let me know that they weren't gonna be voted on today, or that there were any changes that were needed. Is that correct?
Any changes that I asked for, they were just, words.
Right, those were made.
Yeah.
And I did that, and she emailed me right away,
Right.
so.
And that's up to you.
Yeah. So we should,
Well, can we just,
it's a
can
map.
the head of rules, because we're not adjourned, can he say, do we want to vote on them? Because I think everyone's voted on them.
I don't
Yes.
know. if said
You can vote on them. If you want to vote on them, vote on them. This meeting's still not going.
I want to vote on it.
I'm comfortable with all the changes in it.
Yeah, I was too.
President, how you?
No, we can vote on them. The only thing that needed to be added was the table of contents, which I think was added. You have a copy of that.
I've got the book ready to print and go.
Good. Let's do it.
Tracy, we're gonna miss you, Tracy.
That's just, yay or nay.
Yes.
You would,
We're still in committee with this, right? We gotta take it out of committee.
no, it's,
No, you can vote on it.
We can just vote straight on it.
Wait.
But-
Go ahead.
This is not in a committee.
Right.
Okay.
It's
Right.
not an ordinance that
Right.
is voted out of committee.
We were just talking about, that's a vote between you eight.
Right,
so,
just,
Somebody makes a motion,
Do
somebody.
we have a motion
All in
to
favor?
vote on the rule changes for, to accept the rule changes
As presented.
as presented? Do I have a motion?
I will second that motion.
Okay. All in
All
favor,
in
say
favor,
aye.
Say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Hey, that was easy.
That was easy.
Yeah.
There we go.
That works.
Okay, with nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Carol won't add it. I know.
Mrs. DeBevick
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion that we adjourn.
and Mr. Heidig.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adjourn.
It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Heidig that we adjourn. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 6:52, and Merry Christmas.
I have to go down and amend the ordinance and the signs, so I have to go back in tomorrow.
That's what I'm getting to you right now.
You're not staying, huh? You gotta change the way things roll.
We're gonna go down and get the water.
Yes, don't go anywhere.
That's good for you, though. Thank you, Mrs. DeBevick. Thank you for all that you've done. Your name is synonymous with Barberton. Smack him.
Okay, if you wanna know about the game, there's 7:50 left in the third, and it's 10-0. It's not looking pretty.
And you're in the what quarter? The third?
Third. Oh, yeah. 7:50 left in the third, down 10-0.
Down 10-0.
We can probably watch the fourth quarter.
I don't know if it's worth it. The Raiders have the ball again, and they're on our side of the field.
You know, anybody that does rules, they gotta be a partner.
Yep, VCDC, Foundation. Yeah, I just talked to Wagner the other day.
Are we doing the cupcakes in the other room or this room?
Do it in this room, that room's too small.
That room's
Sticking
too
around?
small.
Thank you very much.
Here's,
We staying in here or going in there?
in here.
Or we're staying in here?
Sure, we're staying in here.
Tell them we're staying here, it's too small in there.
Cupcake, that's what you're.
Staying for a cupcake.
That's the only reason she's here.
She went to get ice, I think.
She forgot.
Were you able to get down to Bell Street there?
Yeah, wouldn't be here like that.
Is that gonna be a good email tomorrow?
That's a lot to do. Thank you.
Is that gonna be a good email tomorrow?
No, that was just. Oh, she was going out. I thought another one today.
Well, yeah, once I open everything.
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah.
Did they just forget that you could have
Hopefully.
So look,
I am now.
There it is.
2 days. 2 days.
did they at least like